By the time Nora Dace reached Briggs Flats, she had been turned away from 5 ranches and laughed off 2 porches. At the Briggs yard gate, Bess Briggs looked at the saddle on Nora's shoulder and said, loud enough for the hired men to hear, "We don't hire drifter women." Nora could have turned south right then. Instead, she looked past Bess to the north pasture and saw the thing that would cost the Briggs family their herd, their permit, and maybe the land itself by Friday. And the man setting that trap, Curtis Fane, had already counted on one thing, that nobody would believe a woman with $4 and no reference letter. She had $4.50 in her pocket, 8 days of road dust on her clothes, and 12 years of cattle work no man here had bothered to ask about. She stopped at the north pasture fence before she reached the yard. It was not a decision. She stopped because the fence made her stop, the line of it, the angle, the way the south wire drooped at the 3rd post from the corner. She set her saddle in the grass and pushed her hat back. The north water channel ran along the base of the east slope, and she could see from the grass shadow where the main draw had shifted. Not by much. 6 feet, maybe 8. Enough to change where the water pooled after a dry week. She pressed one hand into the soil near the channel bank. The surface was soft where it should have been firm, and there was an alkali ring at the high water mark. "Can I help you?" She looked up. A man was standing at the yard gate, big through the shoulders, maybe 45, with a hat pulled low and a careful expression. He had come out quietly and she had not heard him. "Your north channel has moved," she said. "The main draw shifted south. By August your herd will be drinking from the wrong pool and the alkaline content will be high enough to cause distress." He came forward a few steps. "That's not an answer to my question." "My name is Nora Dace. I've been working cattle since I was 22 and I'm 34 now. I walked here from Hartwell station because the grain merchant told me you run a north herd that isn't moving the way it should. I'd like to work your cattle." She picked up her saddle. "Let me stay and I'll work your north herd through the summer. I'll take wages." He looked at her for a long moment, then he said, "The grain merchant talks too much." "Most do." He almost smiled. He didn't. "Come to the yard." His name was Colt Briggs. She learned that in the yard, though not from him, from the girl who came down the porch steps before Nora had her saddle set on the fence post. She was not a girl. She was 19, and she moved like someone who had been running a household since she was old enough to hold a ledger. She had her father's eyes and her mother's jaw, and the way she looked at Nora told Nora everything she needed to know about how this conversation was going to go. "We're not hiring," the girl said. Bess, Colt's voice was even. "We had 3 drifters last year, Papa. 2 took their food money and left before the week was out. 1 stayed long enough to eat us through half our winter stores." Rue stopped with a bucket in his hand. Calvin looked away first. That was the part that burned Nora most, not the refusal, but the way decent men suddenly found the dirt interesting when a woman was being measured like a stray dog. Nora did not argue. She said, "Your north fence has 3 posts that are off the original line, not by much, maybe half a foot each. But the spacing pattern is wrong for fence posts set in natural ground. They were moved." She looked at Bess. "Your upper pasture has a stress shadow in the grass that started from the south end of the water change. That means the shift in the channel happened within the past 6 to 8 weeks, not over a season. And the fly hatch pattern around the east bank's water pool is wrong. That water is going stagnant." Bess looked at her father. Colt said nothing. Nora said, "I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to let me prove it or not. If I can't, I'll be on the road by morning." Bess said, "How many head does our north herd run?" "I don't know. But from the fence line and the water draw, I'd estimate you're short 14, maybe a few more from wherever the count was set in spring. They'll have moved south to find better water." Bess's face changed before she could hide it. She had counted that herd twice that week. 11 short had been keeping her awake. Bess's eyes went to the north ridge. Her jaw tightened. "She can have supper and the bunkhouse tonight," Colt said. "We'll talk in the morning." Bess went back inside without agreeing or disagreeing. Colt brought Nora the biscuits himself. He carried the tin from the cookhouse rather than pointing her to it. She noticed that. She also noticed the ring on the 3rd finger of his left hand. Worn dark, not polished. A man who kept it on not out of habit but out of intention. He didn't stay to talk. He said good night and went in. Nora sat on the bunkhouse step, and ate the biscuits in the dark and looked at the north ridge until the light was gone. In the morning, she was at the north gate before the hired hands were up. Colt found her there. She hadn't asked permission. She was just there, standing at the gate in the pale light with her rope measured out and her notebook open. He saddled and came with her without discussing it. Bess watched from the yard ridge with her arms crossed, and Nora did not look at her. The count came to 11 short, not 14. She told him that she had been wrong by 3, and she said so. He looked at her when she said it. Most people don't say when they've been wrong by 3. They rode the east fence, and she showed him the posts. She got off her horse at the third one and knelt in the dirt. "Look at the base," she said. "There are 2 sets of holes. The original post was here." She pressed her thumb into the older mark, "and this one is 6 inches northeast of that position." He got off his horse and crouched beside her. He was close enough that she could hear his breathing slow as he looked. He saw the holes. She knew he saw them. Colt's hand went still on the post when he saw the second hole. "Wind and cattle pressure can shift posts," he said. "On bedrock range it can. This is alluvial soil. It holds an impression for months. If the post shifted by weather, the original hole would show slumping, not a clean wall. This hole has a clean wall. It was pulled and reset." He stood up. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's a serious thing to claim." "I know." He looked north along the fence for a long time. Then he said, 2 weeks, $1 a day, bunk and food. We'll see what the north herd needs." She said yes. They rode back. When they came into the yard, a wire was waiting on the post. Colt took it without opening it in front of her. She saw the name on the sender line, "C. Fane, County Permit Office Agent." He folded it and put it in his pocket. His jaw set in a way that told her the wire was not good news, but he did not offer anything and she did not ask. Curtis Fane arrived 2 days later without sending notice. He rode a good horse, wore a good coat, and carried a leather-bound ledger under one arm. He had a way of looking around a property, taking in the fence posts and the barn size and the visible herd head count. That was so practiced he probably did not know he was doing it anymore. He shook Colt's hand with both of his and asked about the summer grass and the creek water level, and Colt answered plainly because there was nothing else to do. Then Fane looked at Nora, who was mending fence wire on the south side of the yard. "New hand," he said pleasantly to Colt. "Hired hand. She's working the north herd." Fane's smile stayed pleasant as his eyes moved over Nora's patched coat. "The board does get nervous when undocumented hands appear during renewal season. One unregistered person in contact with a permitted herd can complicate an entire claim." He said it softly, but Rue and Calvin both heard it. Colt said, "She's my hired hand. I'll register her." "Wonderful. I only mention it because the renewal inspection is in 3 weeks. The board takes inventory irregularities seriously." He opened the ledger to a marked page and turned it toward Colt. "The co-signature requirement is still in place for this permit year. You'll recall we discussed that. I'm sure it won't be any trouble." He closed the ledger and tucked it back under his arm. "Beautiful north range you have, worth protecting." He said goodbye to Bess, who was watching from the porch steps, and rode out. Bess came down into the yard and stood beside her father. She said, "I don't like him." Colt said, "Nobody does." He looked at the spot where Fane had disappeared around the bend. "But he has the co-signature authority, and without it the renewal doesn't go through the board." Bess looked at Nora, who was still mending wire. "What does he want?" Nora said, "The water claim. Your North Range water flows down from the Highland lease above it. If he absorbs your water claim into his own grazing permit, he can run 300 more head on his upper land. He's been at this long enough to be patient." Colt looked at her. She said, "I've seen this before. In Kansas. A broker gets the co-signature authority, runs down the permit through inspection irregularities, and buys the range when the permit lapses. It takes 2 seasons if he's careful." Neither of them said anything for a moment. Bess went back inside. If you want to know why a drifter woman with a saddle on her back and mud on her boots was about to change everything at Briggs Flats, make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell so you never miss a story like this one. The north herd needed work. Nora knew it on the second morning and had a plan by the third. She moved the water draw schedule so the herd rotated between the east pool and the creek channel on alternating days, which let the alkaline pool settle. She patched the 3 disturbed fence posts on the east line, tamped new soil around their bases, measured their spacing against the rope, and confirmed the positions by triangulating from the ridgetop stakes she found in the brush, which matched the original survey. She did not tell anyone about the stakes. She put them in her notebook. That same afternoon, a county notice came through Hartwell. Preliminary inspection could be moved forward without further warning. Fane had not just complained. He had started a clock. Colt came by the north fence on the 4th afternoon with a tin of water. He handed it to her, and they stood at the fence while the light went orange over the ridge. From the ridge, Nora saw a rider pause near the Fane line and then move on. Colt saw him too. Neither of them named the man. The quiet between them changed after that. "Where did you drive before Wyoming?" he said. "Kansas, 2 seasons for a man named Hewitt out of Dodge City. Before that, Texas." She drank from the tin. "My father ran a small operation in the Pecos country, 1,200 head at the peak. He drove them north in '75, one of the last big drives before the quarantine laws tightened. I rode that drive." "How old were you?" 22. He looked at the fence. 1,200 head is not a small operation. He built it up from nothing, 200 head at a time. He died in '79, fever. The cattle went in the creditor sale. She handed back the tin. "I've worked for wages since." He held the tin and didn't hand it back to the cookhouse boy. "You could have found work closer to Texas." "I was looking for good cattle country, not charity country." He looked at the North Range. "This is good cattle country." "I know, I saw it from the road." He stayed beside her until the light failed. She was aware of him there, his size, the quietness of him, the way he watched the ridge like someone who had watched it for 20 years and expected it to still be there in 20 more. When she turned to go back to the bunkhouse, the ring on his left hand caught the last thin light and threw it back. She said goodnight and walked away without turning back. She heard the horse at the northeast fence line a little after midnight. She was a light sleeper. 12 years of trail crews and bunkhouses had taken the depth out of her rest. She heard the creak of leather and the soft sound of a lantern hinge before she was fully awake, and she was up and moving before she had made any decision to do so. She came to the fence through the dark with her boots on and her hat in her hand. The lantern was at the 3rd post from the corner, the one she had already marked as suspect. A man was working quickly, pulling the post, angling it northeast by a foot or more, tamping the base with his boot. He was not careful. He had done this before and knew how fast it needed to go. He saw her when she was 10 feet away. For 1 second, the lantern lit his jaw and the fox-colored edge of a muffler. Chalk. He swung into the saddle and said, "A smart hand leaves before daylight." Then he rode toward the Fane lease. She stood at the post and looked at it. Then she pulled the top wire staple from the reset post, the new position, and turned the post just enough to expose the back face. She took her folding knife and scratched a single line into the wood, high enough on the back that no one would see it without looking for it. She did the same to each of the 3 posts she had identified before, and the 2 new ones that had been moved tonight. She measured every position against her rope by feel and wrote the numbers by starlight in her notebook. She went back to the bunkhouse and lay down without sleeping. At dawn, she told Colt. He listened. He stood in the yard with his coffee and listened to everything: the lantern, the man's size, the direction he rode, the 5 posts and their new positions versus the old ones she had recorded. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. "I'd want a surveyor to confirm the positions," he said. "So would I, but a surveyor costs $40 and takes 2 weeks to commission. And if I go to the board without a surveyor, Fane says the posts shifted in the weather, and I've accused an officer of the permit system without evidence." "Yes." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I'm not saying I don't believe you. I know what you're saying." She went back to the north herd. He didn't stop her. 3 days after that, Bess found Nora at the barn and asked to speak privately. They stood inside the barn door, out of the hearing of Rue and Calvin, who were working the south fence. Bess crossed her arms and looked at Nora with the directness that was her best quality. "You came here with no reference and no record, and within a week you found fence posts that nobody else saw and a night man from a connected land broker, and now you're asking my father to spend $40 on a surveyor." She paused. "You understand how that looks?" It looks like I'm making myself necessary, Nora said. Yes. Go walk the northeast fence yourself. Count the post spacing with a length of rope, your arm length against mine. Find the scratch marks on the back of the 5 corner posts. Those marks are mine. I put them there so there would be a record before any surveyor came. She looked at Bess steadily. I don't need you to trust me. I need you to look. Bess said nothing for a moment. Then the second wire arrived. Rue brought it from the main road, where the courier had left it at the gate. Colt was at the county office, inquiring about the complaint process, so Bess opened it. She read it once and handed it to Nora. The county board had received an anonymous complaint that the Briggs North herd showed signs of alkaline distress and might be unfit for permit renewal inspection. A preliminary inspector would be sent within 2 weeks. Nora read it twice. Then she said, He moved the water. I moved it back, but the herd was drinking from the alkaline pool for long enough that the inspector will find residual distress markers if he looks at the right cattle. She folded the wire. I can manage the recovery in 10 days if Colt moves the draw correctly and I handle the mineral supplement. But I need full authority over the North herd's water rotation. Bess looked at her. He filed this complaint using the damage he caused, Nora said. That's how it works. He creates the condition and then reports it. She let Bess go pale with that. He filed the damage he caused. Bess was quiet. Then, my father trusts you. I know. That's not an easy thing for him. I know that too. Bess looked at the wire in Nora's hand. She said, All right, work the herd. But she did not go to walk the northeast fence that day. 6 days later, Colt was at the county office again. The inspector's timeline had moved, not 2 weeks, 4 days. Bess made a decision. She made it without her father, which she knew was wrong, but she made it with his land in mind, and she did not apologize for that. She came out to the yard at midday, where Nora was working the north draw schedule with Calvin. Rue was at the south gate. Bess said in front of both of them, Nora, I need you to go. Nora stopped working. You are not a registered county employee on this permit. If the inspector arrives and finds an unregistered outside hand in contact with the herd during the complaint period, Fane will use it against the renewal. I'm not asking your opinion about whether that's fair. Nora looked at her for a moment. She said, Give me 20 minutes to pack. Calvin's hammer stopped against the repair cart. Rue looked at Nora, then at Bess, and said nothing. Nora felt every silent eye in the yard. She had been refused before. This was worse, because for 6 days she had almost believed this place might be different. She packed in 15. She took her saddle and her canvas roll and her notebook and her $4.50 in wages, and she walked out of the Briggs Flats yard without looking back. At the main road junction she stopped. The stage road ran south 2 miles to the Hartwell cutoff, and from there a stage to any town she chose. She had $4.50. She had been on the road before with less. She turned north. She walked to the boundary camp she had been using during the night patrols, a sheltered spot in the creek brush at the northeast corner where the Fane lease line met the Briggs boundary. She made a fire from the dry juniper branches she had stacked there before. She was not leaving the 5 marked posts. She was not leaving the herd that had been drinking from the corrected draw for 6 days and was already showing improvement. Near sundown, Chalk rode the Fane side of the line and did not cross. He only lifted 2 fingers to his hat, as if counting the hours until the inspection. Nora added wood to the fire and kept her notebook open. She sat down by the fire and thought about the water. She turned north, not south. That choice, to stay at the boundary when she had every reason to leave, is the reason this story has an ending worth telling. If you want to hear it, be sure you're subscribed. Colt came back to find the bunkhouse empty and Calvin and Rue looking at their boots. He looked at Bess and she told him what she had done. He did not shout. He went to the barn and saddled and rode to the boundary without telling her where he was going because he knew she already knew. Nora's fire was low. She was sitting beside it with her notebook on her knees, reading over her post-position records in the last of the evening light. She looked up when she heard his horse. He told her Bess was trying to protect the ranch. She said she knew. He said he could register her with the county tonight by telegraph. The office would still be open for another hour. She said she was not going to the county office tonight. She was staying at the boundary. He looked at her. She looked at the fire. "Someone needs to watch the fence," she said, "and I've already got the scratch marks on the posts." He sat on the ground beside the fire, a thing that surprised her, that a man with a house and a yard and a barn would sit on the ground at a boundary camp fire without comment. He was there for a few minutes. The ring on his left hand caught the firelight. He looked like a man trying to say something he had not yet earned the right to say. He stood up before he said it. He said good night and rode back. She added wood to the fire and listened to the creek. The storm came from the north in the second night. It announced itself. She felt the pressure change in the air around 10 o'clock, and by midnight the wind had shifted and the temperature dropped 12 degrees. By 1 in the morning the first rain was coming hard and fast, and by 2 the creek gorge above the north pasture was full and moving. She was already on her feet. She could see from the ridge, she had learned the sight lines from this boundary camp over the past week, that the north fence's far corner post, one of the original ones she had not touched, had gone down in the wind. The wire had sprung back and made a gap. 12 cows had pushed through the gap into the floodpath gully on the west side of the channel. She rode in. The gully was wide and shallow in dry weather. In a flood year it ran 4 feet deep and moved fast, full of sandstone, gravel, and branch debris from the upper creek. Tonight it was rising. Her horse was strong, a borrowed spare she had used for the boundary work, and he took the first chest-high current without balking. She got 3 cows up the side cut with the rope. The surge was rising faster than she had anticipated. The upper gorge must have been full already. And when the water reached her horse's belly on the return run, she felt the shift in his balance. He went lame on the 4th run. A stone ledge under the water, flat and invisible, and his left front hoof caught the edge at the wrong angle. He planted, and she felt the bruise hitch in his step immediately. She got off. The water was at her waist. Her boots filled and dragged. She had 9 cows still in the gully. She took the rope off the saddle and went in without the horse. The current was strong enough to take her sideways on each step. She moved along the gully wall using her hands on the rock face for purchase, driving the cows ahead of her with her voice, and the rope end swung side to side. She could not see well. The lantern was on the rope end of the far post, and the rain was heavy. She counted the cows by feel, by the sound of them, by the warmth of them in the cold water. She got the first 3 through the side cut, then 2 more, then 3 more. She was chest-deep on the last run, water moving at her shoulders, and she had lost her boots somewhere on the gravel floor. She drove the last cow up the cut bank on her hands and knees, pushing from behind with both palms on the animal's hip. She crawled out herself. She lay on the gravel bank for a moment, breathing. Her right knee had caught a submerged stone on the last run. She felt the swelling starting immediately, the hot, tight feeling under the cold. She crawled to higher ground and counted. 12 cows, all alive, all on the Briggs side of the gully. She built a fire from the dry side of a juniper log she had stockpiled at the camp, and sat in the dark wrapped in the dry half of her canvas roll, waiting for her hands to stop shaking. Then she looked at the fence line. The flood surge had moved Chalk's posts again. This was expected. She had seen it coming in the water pattern. But the surge had done something else. The original post holes from the first set positions, the Briggs 1879 alignment, were now clearly visible in the churned mud below the flood line. The water had scoured the soil away from the old holes, which were 8 inches to the southwest of the current post positions. The old holes were clean-walled and aligned. The moved posts sat in their wrong positions, off the true line by a foot or more. She had a letter in her coat, a letter from Wyoming that she had never answered, now blank on the back. She folded it open. She had a pencil. She drew the post positions by feel and firelight, measuring against her rope, marking the old holes against the new ones, sketching the flood level and the drainage direction. The mud from her hands came off onto the page, and she pressed it in deliberately. The mineral content of the creek mud was specific, not something anyone could replicate. She wrote the date and the time in the corner. She wrote the water temperature by estimate, a detail that would matter later. She put the letter in her inside coat pocket. She sat by the fire until it was light. Colt checked the north count from the ridge at first light. He counted twice. The number was 12 head more than the pre-flood count allowed for. He went to the barn and looked at the horses. Nora's borrowed spare was there with a stone-bruised hoof, already wrapped by someone. Bess must have come in and seen to it before the morning work. The main spare was gone. He walked back into the yard. Bess was on the porch with her coffee. He told her. She was quiet. She set down the coffee. She looked at the north ridge. Then she went into the barn and saddled. Rue and Calvin were loading a repair cart at the south barn door. They watched her go. They had both been at the yard when Bess fired Nora in front of them. Bess knew they were watching. She rode to the boundary camp. Nora was sitting on her bedroll in the early sun with her right knee wrapped in rope cloth and a piece of paper folded on her knee. She was soaked from the night. She looked at Bess coming down the creek path without expression. Bess got off her horse. Only then did Bess see Nora's boots missing, the blood-dark scrape below her knee, and the rope burns across both palms. Behind her, the 12 cows stood on Briggs grass, alive because the woman Bess had dismissed had not gone south. She stood in front of Nora in the mud and the wet grass. She had thought about what to say on the ride, and she had decided she was not going to say very much, because a long speech when you have been wrong is just an attempt to make the wrong person feel better about the right person's suffering. She said, "I told you to go. The markers are real. I was wrong about you. I don't know how to fix that except to say it." Nora looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "I need 3 things: a horse to ride back on, a county surveyor at the northeast fence by Friday, and a straight answer from you about whether you're going to fight me again every time the ranch gets difficult." Bess said, "No, not again." They did not embrace. They stood in the mud and looked at each other. There was a long moment in which nothing happened and nothing needed to. Nora folded the mud-stained paper and put it in her inside coat pocket. She stood up. Her knee made her jaw set, but she did not make a sound about it. "Get me a horse," she said. She rode back on Bess's spare. Colt was at the gate when she came through, and he took the horse's reins without being asked, just reached up and held them while she swung down. She landed badly on the knee, and he held the horse steady without commenting on it. She limped to the bunkhouse and spread her records on the table. Rue came in with a plate from the cookhouse without being asked. Calvin came in with coffee. Neither of them said anything about the previous week. Calvin said, "I'll ride to the county office today and put your name in the ledger as a Briggs hand. It'll be official by nightfall." She said, "Do that." Bess sent a telegraph to the county surveyor's office in Hartwell that same afternoon. Nora wrote for 3 hours, the complete record of every post position measurement, every water intake count, every entry in her notebook since the day she arrived at the north gate. She wrote the flood night positions in a separate section and attached the mud-stained letter with its sketched post map. She labeled every entry with a date and a weather note. When she was done, she had 12 pages that told the story of the Briggs north boundary, from the first morning to the morning after the flood. That evening Chalk came to the gate. He did not dismount. He said to Colt, "Mr. Fane asks that you reconsider the survey commission. If the Briggs party insists on a formal survey of the northeast boundary, Mr. Fane will be required to report to the board that the Briggs North herd was herded through a broken fence section into an unauthorized area during the flood event of the night previous. This would constitute a permit violation under County Code, Section 14. Colt said, "Tell Mr. Fane we've heard him." Chalk rode out. Colt came to the bunkhouse door. Nora was putting her records in order. He said, "He'll use the flood." "I know. If the board finds a permit violation alongside the boundary dispute, they may rule against both claims." "I know," she looked at him. "But the flood hole positions in the mud page show the posts were already moved before the flood. The surveyor will measure from the original registered post holes. They're still there in the mud, 8 inches southwest of the current post positions. Those holes align to the Briggs 1879 permit specification. The flood moved the current posts further from the Briggs line, not closer. That means the flood violation claim collapses the moment the surveyor maps the original holes." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "You worked that out from a piece of paper in the dark." "It's what I do." He sat down on the bench inside the door. He was still for a long time. "If Fane argues that you moved the original posts yourself before the flood, then Rue and Calvin will tell the board what the post condition was on the morning I first reported to you, before the flood. Their account will match my records exactly because those are the same measurements." He looked at his hands. "This is your land," he said, "not mine to put you at risk for." "It is mine too," she said. "Every post I set, every cow I ran through that water last night. I don't have a deed to it, and I understand that. But I know where every water draw runs on your north range, and I know where every fence post sits, and I know how your cattle drink in dry weather versus wet weather. That is mine. You can't take that away by telling me it's your land." He was quiet for a long time. He looked at his left hand. He slid the ring off, just slid it off, carefully, the way you handle a thing you have been holding so long your hand has shaped itself to it. He held it in his palm for a moment and then put it in his coat pocket. She was not looking at him. She was reading her records. He said, "Will Bess ride with you to the board?" "I already asked her. She said yes." He said, "I'll ride too, not for the land." She looked up at him. He held her eyes for a moment, then he stood up and went out. She looked at the door he had closed behind him. She went back to her records. The county grazing board met in a room at the back of the land office, a low-ceilinged place with a long table and 8 chairs, and a row of surveying maps on the wall. The window faced east, and the morning light came in flat and white, which was good. It made everything on the table visible without shadow. Fane was there when they arrived. He had a lawyer beside him, a man named Albright who wore a city coat and carried a case full of organized papers. Fane's expression when he saw Nora was pleasantly neutral, the same face he had used in the Briggs yard, the same practiced calm. He greeted Colt by name and did not greet Nora. The board had 6 members. The chair was a man named Doles, who kept his words in order and ran the meeting without drama. On his left sat Merritt. Nora had been told his name by Calvin, who said Merritt was the one to watch. He was a cattle rancher from the North County who had fought 2 permit disputes of his own and trusted nothing he could not measure. Albright spoke first for Fane. Nora Dace was an outside party, dismissed from Briggs' employment for cause, who had remained on Briggs' property without authorization and produced a set of self-serving records that could not be independently verified. Her presence at the north boundary during the flood had been unauthorized, and her report of marker positions was the account of a party with clear interest. The boundary markers in question had been in place and unchallenged for 4 years. If the posts had shifted, it was weather and cattle pressure. There was no pattern of malicious conduct on the part of any permitted broker. Merritt said, "What independent evidence do you bring?" Albright said the county permit records showed no irregularity, and the Fane brokerage had held co-signature authority without challenge since 1880. Merritt said, "That's not evidence of anything except that no one had looked." The board brought in the surveyor. His name was Garrett, and he had spent 2 days with a chain on the northeast boundary of the Briggs property and had filed his measurements with the land office before this meeting. He placed his diagram on the table. The 1879 Briggs permit specification was on file. Every registered post position was recorded in the county land record from the original survey. Garrett's current chain measurements showed the northeast boundary posts in their present positions. He read the numbers. The corner post was 4.7 feet northeast of its registered position. The adjacent post was 3.2 feet offline. The third post was 2.9 feet off. All 3 displaced in the direction of the Fane lease. Fane's lawyer said, "A significant flood event occurred in the night of the 15th. The flood could account for post displacement." Garrett said, "I measured the original post holes. They are still visible in the mud diagram. The original holes are aligned to the 1879 specification. They sit 4.7, 3.2, and 2.9 feet southwest of the current post positions, respectively, in the direction of the Briggs legal line. If the flood moved the posts, it moved them from the legal line toward the Fane lease, which is not a direction consistent with the floodwater drainage pattern, which ran east to west. The flood drainage would have moved the posts east, not northeast." Merritt's chair scraped back. He looked at Fane, not Garrett. That was the first time Nora saw Curtis Fane stop smiling. Merritt turned the mud paper toward the other board members without saying a word. The 2 members who had not spoken leaned forward at the same time. Albright said, "The original holes could have been created by Ms. Dace herself, who was present at the boundary during the flood." Albright touched Fane's sleeve, warning him without words. Fane shook him off, and the room saw it. Nora spoke. She placed the mud-stained letter on the table. She said, I recorded the post positions on the night of the flood before the surge reached full height. The paper is stained with mud from the North Creek Gorge-specific mineral content, high in calcium carbonate, which is consistent with the gorge and not with the pasture soil. The position marks on the paper correspond exactly to Mr. Garrett's diagram of the original holes. She looked at Merritt. If I had been at those holes creating them, the mud content on this paper would be pasture mud, not gorge mud. The gorge mud got on this paper because I was standing in the gorge water when I wrote it. Merritt picked up the paper. He looked at it closely. He looked at Garrett's diagram. He placed them side by side. He placed the paper beside the diagram and held both toward the light without speaking. Doles stopped writing. Fane said, "This woman moved the posts herself before the flood, created the paper to establish a false timeline, and then positioned herself to appear as a witness to her own fabrication." He said it with full confidence. He had prepared this. It was the only story that could still save his claim. The room heard the speed in his voice. Rue stood up so suddenly his chair knocked the wall. He looked ashamed it had taken him this long. He was not a large man, and he was not a natural speaker, but he had been at the Briggs Ranch for 4 years, and he did not like Curtis Fane or his night man or the wire that had cost Nora her bunk for a week. He said, "I was at the Briggs North boundary on the second morning after Nora Dace arrived. I saw the post positions she reported to Mr. Briggs that morning. The condition of those posts, the spacing irregularity, the soil disturbance at the base, matched what she described. That was before any flood, before any survey. I can say on record that the positions were as she reported." Calvin said the same, shorter and simpler. Same morning, same posts, same irregularity, she didn't make it up. Merritt looked from Rue to Fane. He did not look away from Fane first. Doles laid his pen down. "Then this board has 2 ranch witnesses, 1 county surveyor, 1 physical diagram, and 1 false complaint." He looked at Fane. "Mr. Fane, do you have anything to add that does not require us to disbelieve 4 independent sources?" Bess covered her mouth with one hand when Rue said Nora had reported the posts before the flood. Fane said nothing. For the first time in this room, he had nothing to say. The board voted 4-2 in favor of the Briggs claim. Fane's broker license for Crestfield County was suspended pending investigation of the complaint filing and the boundary manipulation evidence. The Briggs North Range permit was renewed without co-signature. Fane's flood violation counterclaim was dismissed as a bad faith filing under County Code Section 31. Doles did not let Fane leave with his authority intact. "Mr. Fane, the county broker seal stays on this table until the investigation closes." Fane's hand tightened around the leather ledger. Then, in front of Colt, Bess, Nora, Rue, Calvin, and every board member, he opened it and removed the small brass seal. The sound it made on the table was louder than the vote. Albright was already putting papers back in the case. They left the room before the chair had formally closed the meeting. And what happened after that vote mattered just as much as the vote itself. Outside the land office, the county seat street was warm and ordinary. A freight wagon going north. A woman sweeping her step. The kind of morning that doesn't know it was part of a long story. Bess stood beside Nora on the boardwalk. She said, "You could have ridden south at the boundary. The stage would have had you to Hartwell Station by morning." Nora said, 12 cows and a good fence line. Hard to walk away from." Bess was quiet. Then, "Is that all it was?" Nora looked at her and didn't answer. Colt was a few steps back on the boardwalk, talking to Garrett and Merritt. Merritt was the kind of man who listened to what he didn't expect to hear and then didn't forget it. He was shaking Colt's hand now and saying something that made Colt nod. Rue and Calvin were by the horses, and Calvin said he needed to eat something before the ride back, and Rue said he agreed, and Nora said they had earned it and she would tell it to anyone who asked. They went to the cafe on the corner. Bess ordered coffee and a plate, and Nora ordered the same and said nothing when Colt paid for it without asking whether she minded. Fane's brokerage tent, the canvas operation he ran out of the county seat on land transfer days, was folded and gone by mid-afternoon. Chalk was seen at the livery stable, settling his horse's board and asking about routes north. 2 other hands rode out by evening, separately, not together, each of them looking for work that was not attached to a suspended broker license. On the road back to Briggs Flats, the light was long and golden, and the range smelled of wet grass and good soil after the rain. Nora rode beside Colt and they were quiet for a long time, not the quiet of people who have nothing to say, the other kind. He said, "I should have acted on the markers sooner. The second morning when I saw the holes, I should have commissioned the survey." "You acted when you could." "I should have asked you to stay sooner, when she..." "You acted when you could," she said again, not forgiveness, just fact. The road ran long in the evening light. He said, "I should have asked you to stay." She looked at the ridge. "You can ask me now." He was quiet then. "Will you stay?" She looked at the North Range, visible now from the road, the fence line clean and straight, the herd moving in the low light, everything the way it should be. She said, "Ask me again when we get to the ranch." They reached Briggs Flats in the early evening. The horses went in first. Nora's lame horse had been tended, stone bruise wrapped and repoulticed since morning, probably Bess, probably at first light before she rode to the board. Nora stood in the barn with her saddle roll. Through the window of the house she could see the kitchen. Bess was at the table. She was moving between the stove and the table, and she was setting plates, 1, 2, 3, and a water pitcher and a tin of salt. 3 plates, not 2. The chair at the left side of the table had always been in the corner when Nora had come in for a meal, pushed back against the wall, not as storage, not as careless neglect, but in the way people push back chairs that they are not ready to use yet. Bess pulled it to the table. Colt came to the barn door. He held it open, just held it, looking at her. Nora picked up her saddle. She carried it to the left wall of the barn. There was a hook there, iron, old, clean, empty. She had noticed it the first morning she worked in this barn. She had not asked about it because the answer was in the way the rest of the barn's hooks were full and this one was not, and in the way Colt had looked at it without looking at it. She hung her saddle on the hook. The leather settled against the iron with a soft sound and then was still. Colt said, "I'll need a drover through the autumn drive. The pay is fair and the work is harder than you know." She said, "I know exactly how hard it is." He said, "After the autumn drive." He stopped. She said, "After the autumn drive, you can ask me something harder. I might say yes." She walked past him through the barn door. Her knee still pulled when she put her weight on it wrong, but she walked steadily, toward the lighted window where Bess was waiting with 3 plates on the table and a chair pulled out. That morning she had walked into the boardroom as a dismissed drifter with a mud-stained paper in her coat. That evening, her saddle hung on the only empty hook in the Briggs barn, and nobody asked whose place it was. At the kitchen table, the 3rd plate waited beside the salt tin. The stage road still lay 2 miles south, but Nora no longer measured home by roads. She measured it by the fence line, the cattle in their proper grass, and the chair Bess had pulled out for her. She came through the kitchen door and Bess looked at her and nodded. Once, the way people nod when they have said everything that matters, and Nora sat down in the chair on the left side. Bess put the coffee pot on the table. Colt came through the door and hung his hat on the peg and sat down beside Nora instead of at the head of the table, so that Bess was across from them both and they were together on the same side, which was not something she had arranged but was exactly right. Outside, the North Range was quiet, the fence line was straight, the cattle were where they were supposed to be, the stage road was 2 miles south. Nora's saddle was on the hook.